Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I am your host, Brian Scott. We're going to have a lot of fun today. I wanted to dedicate an episode to the secret story of Maldek. One of the most fascinating and interesting concepts coming from the Law of One was the story of Maldek. In the Law of One material, which is channeled material, called in many places the raw material, that included three people that channeled this work: Carla Ruckert, Jim McCarty, Don Elkins, and in the early 80s came about with 106 sessions that talked about our universe, life, reincarnation, and a number of amazing things. One of those things was Maldek. This blew me away. I've always wondered what happened with the asteroid belt in our planetary system, and wondered if there was some sort of story behind it, and if there was a possibility there was another planet there that was destroyed. One of the first times I heard about this was an amazing book by Robert J. Sawyer called End of an Era, a sort of time travel story where he ends up on Earth way in the past, and the aliens are using dinosaurs as actual vehicles of war, and there is this other planet that is in battle. So that is just a science fiction story. But then I started to see it referred to in other places. After doing some research, it is referred to in George Hunt Williamson's book, The Saucer Speak, as well as a book called Other Tongues, Other Flesh. And if you have got a chance, check out my episode from Orfeo Angolucci, where he talks about his own experience being taken on a flying disc and being met by somebody called Neptune, who explains also the story of Maldek. In that book, he says, after telling him about the history of the universe, Angelucci asks, "Why should Earth's people know pain, suffering, and death? Why must it be so?" And this higher alien entity that he's speaking to looked up into the heavens, and in the soft light, he saw deep compassion and said, "The answer to that question is one of the mysteries of the illusion of time. But I can tell you this, such conditions did not always prevail among the entities who now inhabit Earth. Once there was another planet in your solar system, the fairest and most radiant of all the planets. That planet was the original home of Earthlings. In their native home, they knew no pain, sorrow, suffering, sickness, or death. But in the glory and wonder of their world, they grew proud and arrogant. They made war among themselves and finally turned against the great giver of life. Ultimately, they destroyed their own planet, which today exists only as a sterile and barren ring of asteroids and debris in the solar system. In order that those entities might gain understanding, compassion, and brotherly love, they were born into the animalistic material evolution of a lesser planet, Earth. Suffering, sorrow, frustration, and death became their teacher. Their symbol became the man-beast. Each man must work out his own destiny and salvation in the illusion of time, and through repeated births and deaths, each entity slowly and painfully evolves spiritually toward its former glorified state of divinity. Eventually, all the entities of Earth will again attain their lost heritage. They will have learned understanding, compassion, and true love for God and their fellows." So we get an idea that the story of Maldek, this planet in our solar system that was destroyed, may be a fundamental part of our own history and past. In the book, Other Tongues, Other Flesh, George Hunt Williamson refers to this other planet as Lucifer, and also indicates that the name is Maldek. I wanted to read a little bit in the Law of One material before we go into that to talk about what they say about Maldek, as this information is just a little bit different, but may have been influenced by this earlier channeled information about UFOs from the 50s that we'll read. In the first place, we hear from Ra, at one time space in what is your past, there was a population of third density beings upon a planet which dwelt within your solar system. There are various names by which this planet has been named. The vibratory sound complex most usually used by your peoples is Maldek. These entities destroying their planetary sphere thus were forced to find room for themselves upon this third density, which is the only one in your solar system at their time-space present, which was hospitable and capable of offering the lessons necessary to decrease their mind-body-spirit distortions with respect to the law of one. They ask, is all of Earth's population then human population of the Earth? Are all of them originally from Maldek? Ra says, this is a new line of questioning and deserves a place of its own. The ones who were harvested to your sphere from the sphere known before its dissolution as other names, but to your peoples as Maldek, incarnated many within your Earth's surface rather than upon it. The population of your planet contains many various groups harvested from other second dimension and cycled third dimension spheres. You are not all one race or background of beginning. The experience you share is unique to this time-space continuum. They then ask, is there any particular race of people on our planet who are incarnated here from second density? They explain there are no second density consciousness complexes here on your sphere at this time. However, there are two races which use the second density form. One is the entities of the planetary sphere you call Maldek. These entities are working their understanding complexes through a series of what you call karmic restitutions. They dwell within your deeper underground passageways and are known to you as Bigfoot. In another session, they ask, I think it would clarify things for us to go back in time just before the transfer of souls from Maldek, to see how the Law 1 operated with respect to this transfer and why this was necessary. What happened to Maldek, or the people on Maldek, to cause them to lose their planet? How long ago did this occur? Ra, saying, I am Ra, states, the peoples of Maldek had a civilization somewhat similar to that of the societal complex known to you as Atlantis, in that it gained much technological information and used it without care for the preservation of their sphere, following to a majority extent to the complex of thought, ideas, and actions which you may associate with your so-called negative polarity or the service to self. This was, however, for the most part couched in a sincere belief, thought structure, which seemed to the perception of the mind-body complexes of this sphere to be positive and of service to others. The devastation that racked their biosphere and caused its disintegration resulted from what you would call war. The escalation went to the furthest extent of the technology this social complex had at its disposal in the space-time present of then time. This time was approximately 705,000 of your years ago. The cycles had begun much earlier upon the sphere due to its relative ability to support the first-dimensional life forms at an earlier point in the space-time continuum of your solar system. These entities were so traumatized by this occurrence that they were in what you call a social complex knot or tangle of fear. Some of your time passed. No one could reach them. No beings could aid them. Approximately 600,000 years ago, the then existing members of the Confederation were able to deploy a social memory complex and untie the knot of fear. The entities were then able to recall that they were conscious. This awareness brought them to the point upon what you would call the lower astral planes, where they could be nurtured until each mind-body-spirit complex was able finally to be healed of this trauma, to the extent that each entity was able to examine the distortions it had experienced in the previous life illusion complex. After this experience of learned teaching, the group decision was to place upon itself a type of what you may call karma alleviation. For this purpose, they came into incarnation within your planetary sphere in what were not acceptable human forms. This, then, they have experienced until the distortion of destruction are replaced by distortions toward the desire for a less distorted vision of service to others. Since then was the conscious decision of the great majority of those beings in the Maldek experience. The transition to this planet began approximately 500,000 of your years ago, and the type of body complex available at that time was used. This is fascinating information. This means that after Maldek destroyed itself, that for 100,000 years, a knot of souls just existed in space that were not aware of their own consciousness. Many of us could have been stuck in that state. And fortunately, this advanced Confederation group came in and slowly untied this knot of souls, of fear, untangling the knot and then bringing them into the astral plane. And then for another 100,000 years, they went about trying to make them aware of what they had done. And then so for many hundreds of thousands of years, they were going through this process, and eventually they decided to come to Earth in a distorted form, at least according to the law of one. And we're going to read some other material that may contradict this a little bit, but it's very interesting to share all of this information. They also ask, and have any of the Maldek entities transformed now? Are they now still second density, or are they forming some third density planet now? Ross says the consciousness of these entities has always been third density. The alleviation mechanism was designed by the placement of this consciousness in second dimensional physical chemical complexes, which are not able to be dexterous or manipulative to the extent which is appropriate to the workings of the third density distortion of the mind complex. In another session, they ask, then our present race is formed of a few who originally came from Maldek and quite a few who came from Mars. Are there entities here from other places? Ross says there are entities experiencing your time-space continuum who have originated from many, many places, as you would call them, in the creation. For when there is a cycle change, those who must repeat then find a planetary sphere appropriate for this repetition. It is somewhat unusual for a planetary mind-body-spirit complex to contain those from many, many various loci. But this explains much for you to see. You are experiencing the third dimensional occurrence with a large number of those who must repeat this cycle. The orientation thus has been difficult to unify even with the aid of many of your teach learners, which is fascinating, meaning that we are living in a planet with a whole bunch of different people from different races and planets all over, and it's a super unique situation, as we've discussed before. They ask, when Maldek was destroyed, did all the people have the problem, or were some advanced enough to transfer to other planets? Ross says, in the occurrence of planetary dissolution, none escaped. For this is an action which redounds to the social complex of the planetary complex itself. None escaped the knot or tangle. Meaning that you could have had Buddha, you could have some super advanced people on that planet, and of course there were, and they were all stuck by the planet. So it doesn't matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you are stuck with this planet. If it destroys itself, there's nothing you can do about that. They ask in another session, you said yesterday that Maldek was destroyed due to warfare. If Maldek hadn't destroyed itself due to warfare, would it have become a planet that evolved with self-service? And would entities have increased in density, gone on to say fourth, fifth density in the negative sense or in the sense of self-service? Ross says the planetary social memory complex had in common with your own sphere the situation of a mixture of energy direction. Thus, it, though unknown, would most probably have been a mixed harvest, a few moving to fourth density, a few moving towards fourth density in service to self, the great majority repeating third density. This is approximate due to the fact that parallel probability vortices cease when action occurs and new possibility vortices are begun, which is fascinating. We have a similar situation here. And if we go back to the earlier message that they said, that many people thought they were being service to others in the process of destroying their planet. And we see that today. We see manipulation on that level where people think they're doing good, but they're destroying the planet. This kind of manipulation we can talk about in another episode about Orion, but it's a fascinating thing. They explain the division of entities on Earth from Maldek in another channeling, saying there are three basic divisions of origins of these entities. First and primarily, those of the planetary sphere you call Maldek, having become able to take up third density once again, were gradually loosed from self-imposed limitations of form. Second, there were those of other third density entrants or neophytes whose vibratory patterns matched the Terran experiential nexus. These then filtered in through the incarnative processes. And third, in the past 200 of your years have experienced much visiting of the wanderers. It may be noted that all possible opportunities for incarnation are being taken at this time due to your harvesting process and the opportunities which this offers. Now, the real mind-blowing information for me comes from George Hunt Williamson. Check out my previous episodes where I've read some of George Hunt Williamson's work. This is sort of the origin where the Law of One got a lot of its information and where they were inspired to try to channel Ra. And in this work, we get the first mentions of Maldek all the way back in the 50s. This book even gives biblical and historical references for you to understand the Maldek idea. Williamson gives examples of how Maldek was actually a morning star, something that we saw in the sky, and many of the references to morning star in the Bible may be referring to Maldek. The interesting contradiction here is that he is saying that Maldek was destroyed much more recently than they are saying in the Law of One Material. Remember, in a multidimensional universe, both of these things may be true. When we're at this point, we may have people that have experienced multiple different realities, and we may be hearing truth in both of these stories. Williamson begins by saying, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, O day star, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners? All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, everyone in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through a sword, that go down to the stones of the pit. As a carcass trodden under feet, thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy hand, and slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall never be renowned. Prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. For I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant, and son and nephew, saith the Lord. Isaiah 14:12-22. The word Lucifer comes from a Latin word meaning light bringing, a name sometimes given by poets to the moon or to the planet Venus when it appears as the morning star, and to the day in ancient times this word was wrongly interpreted to mean Satan. The Hebrew meaning of the word seems to be brilliant, splendid, illustrious, or, as in the Septuagint, Vulgate, the rabbinical commentators Luther and others, brilliant star, and in this sense was the proper name among the Hebrews of the morning star. Tertullian and Gregory the Great understood this passage of Isaiah in reference to the fall of Satan, in consequence of which the name Lucifer has since been applied to Satan, and this is now the usual acceptance of the word. Dr. Henderson in his Isaiah renders the line, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O illustrious son of the morning?" Dr. Henderson says, the application of this passage to Satan and to the fall of the apostate angels is one of those gross perversions of sacred writ, which so extensively obtain, which are to be traced to a proneness to seek for more in any given passage than it really contains. The only place in the Holy Bible where the word Lucifer is found is in Isaiah. The early church fathers were under the impression that the passage could only refer to Satan, the prince of darkness. However, Satan in the Bible has no connection with the Lucifer of Isaiah. Isaiah was figuratively speaking of the king of Babylon in reference to his glory and pomp, but he was actually referring to the destruction of a planet known to the ancient world as the Shining One. Lucifer and its remains are now to be observed in the telescope as the asteroid belt. By a curious chain of reference, the passage in Luke 10:18 once was thought to refer to Isaiah 14:12, but this passage says, "I beheld Satan as lightning falling from heaven." Even though this passage speaks of Satan, Lucifer became the chief of the fallen angels, the name borne by Satan before his rebellion. However, it must be stated again that Satan is in no way connected with Lucifer. In the Saucer Speak, Zoe said, "Your so-called hydrogen bomb could make an asteroid belt out of you." This happened many years ago to the planet of what you would call the fifth orbit. We knew what they were doing, but we didn't interfere. We cannot stand by and see another waste. After their destruction, there were terrible disasters on Masar or Mars. Great volcanic eruptions took place. Many of our people perished. We would have been thrown out of this solar system and lost if we had not quickly constructed 2 artificial satellites. Some of you scientists have noticed that our so-called moons, Phobos and Deimos, reflect too much light to be made of earthly substance. They are right. They are metallic in nature. They are readjusted our unstable condition and saved a planet. It is true that the ancient poets knew of the satellites of Mars before their discovery, and ancient astrological works mention them. Jonathan Swift in Gulliver's Travels 1726 wrote that Mars had 2 satellites, and his complete description of them was most accurate. They were actually discovered as late as 1877 by Asaph Hall of the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. How did Swift and all these other individuals know that Mars had 2 moons? If the prophet Isaiah was actually referring to a fallen star or a destroyed planet, let us see if his description as found in the 14th chapter fits such a happening. To begin with, he wonders how Lucifer, then a morning star, fell from heaven. A morning star can now be Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, or Venus, when rising shortly before the sun and forming a conspicuous object in the sky just before dawn. Hence, figuratively, a forerunner or one who announces and guides. For a planet to be called the morning star, it must be west of the sun and visible before sunrise. When bright planets are east of the sun and therefore visible in the early evening, they are called evening stars. The ancients, not realizing they were the same stars in different roles, called Venus when the evening star Hesperus or Vesper, and when it was the morning star Phosphorus. Mercury was called Mercury when it was the evening star, but it was called Apollo when it was a morning star. When we think of morning stars, now we immediately associate it with the planet Venus. Therefore, we think the ancient word Lucifer also applied to Venus. However, this is not the case. Venus and Mercury were known primarily as evening stars, but when Venus was a morning star, it was called Phosphorus. This word comes from the Greek phos, light, and pharo, bear. The asteroid belt, then the planet Lucifer, was also known as the morning star. Did the destruction of Lucifer take place in Isaiah's time? This is not likely, for history tells us there were great catastrophes on Earth as early as the 13th century BC. And remember, space intelligences refer to our Earth as Saros or Saras, the sorrowful planet on the planet of much cataclysm. The Old Testament is literally full of references to the end of the planet known to the ancients of Earth as Lucifer and to outer space intelligences as Maldek, the silver-tongued. The first 3 letters of the planet's name, Mal, mean tongue. For a moment, let us refer once again to James 3:5 through 10. There is a double meaning to be found here, for James is not only talking about the literal tongue of man, but he is speaking metaphorically of Maldek or Lucifer. James 3:5. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. In reference to Maldek, this could be translated, even so the planet Maldek, tongue, is a little world, member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a destruction a little explosion causes. James 3:6, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. This verse can also be translated, and the tongue is a fire, that world of iniquity. The tongue is among our members, that which defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the wheel of nature, or birth, and is set on fire by hell, or Gehenna. Referring again to Maldek, James 3:6 could read, and Maldek is a flame that would of iniquity. Maldek, the tongue, is among our planet's members, that which defileth the whole solar system, and setteth on fire the vortex or wheel of nature, or birth, and is set on fire by the unseen state, which is hell. In Greek, hell is here translated as Gehenna, Hebrew Gehinnom. Gehinnom was the value of Hinnom near Jerusalem, where the city's refuse was thrown and burned, hence hell, fire, and hell itself, the place of future torments of the wicked. The last part of James 3:6 can also be translated, and it is set on fire of hell. In referring to Maldek, This would give us, and Maldek is set on fire of the unseen states of hell. This means that Maldek was a world of iniquity that exploded and burned and was a planet in our solar system that defied all other planets because of its evil, and Maldek, the tongue, set on fire its vortex, the power of its birth and being, and therefore was set on fire of the unseen state. Because Maldek released the terrible hydrogen power, she broke her vortex and was thereby reduced to an unseen state. In James 3:7, for every kind of beast and of birds and of serpents and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind, the nature of man. We see here that man in this solar system had tamed everything, for all things of nature were under his control. James 3:8, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Man could not tame Maldek, the tongue, for it was an undisciplined child of the solar system. It wished to have power over all other planets and desired the authority of the Creator himself. Maldek was therefore full of deadly poison. James 3:9, therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Maldek, the tongue, praised the Father, but cursed all men who are in the likeness of God. James 3:10, out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Maldek blessed and cursed at the same time, but this is not living true universal law of the infinite Father. These things should not exist side by side. I mentioned before the Old Testament has many references to the destruction of Lucifer or Maldek. Maldek as a world came to an abrupt end during the Exodus from Egypt in the days of Moses, the 13th century before Christ. The Exodus took place amid a great natural upheaval that terminated the period of Egyptian history known as the Middle Kingdom. Contemporary Egyptian documents describe the same disaster accompanied by the plagues of Egypt. One of the first visible signs on earth of the destruction of Maldek was the reddening of the earth's surface by a fine dust of rusty pigment. Ipuwer, an Egyptian eyewitness of the catastrophe, wrote his description on papyrus. The river is blood. Plague is throughout the land. Blood is everywhere. The papyrus Ipuwer corresponds very well with the book of Exodus 7:20. All the waters were in the river were turned to blood. And in Exodus 7:21, there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. The presence of the red dust in the rivers caused the fish to die, and there was decomposition and foul odor. Exodus 7:21, and the river stank. Exodus 7:24, and all the Egyptians digged around about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. The papyrus Ipuwer says, men shrink from tasting human beings' thirst after water. That is our water, that is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruin. Men had boils and sickness, cattle died from irritating red dust. Exodus 93, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle, which is in the field, upon the horses, upon the asses, upon the camels, upon the oxen, and upon the sheep. There shall be a very grievous murrain, pestilence or plague. After the coming of the red dust, another strange phenomenon took place. Exodus 9:8. And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, take to your handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it toward the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. Exodus 9:9. And it shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt, and shall be a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast throughout all the land of Egypt. This small dust, like the ashes of the furnace, sounds identically the same as the radioactive ash that fell on men and animals in the Pacific Ocean after atomic tests there recently. Even some of the fish were contaminated. It is possible that this small dust or ash was the radioactive material sent out after the explosion of Maldek and entered the Earth's atmosphere before the next happening, the shower of meteorites that struck Earth. Exodus 9:18. Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such as hath not been in Egypt since the foundation thereof, even until now. Stones of Barad are translated here as hail. However, Barad is the term for meteorites. Midrashic sources and the Babylonian Talmud tell us that the stones which fell on Egypt were hot. Therefore, the hail could not have been ice, for this description fits only meteorites. The ancient Egyptian word for hail was are, and means a driving shower of sand and stones. Also in the book of Joshua, it is said that great stones fell from the sky, and they are called stones of Barad. Exodus 9:24. So there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt, since it became a nation. Exodus 9:25. And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast, and the hail smote every herb of the field, and broke every tree of the field. Exodus 9:28. Entreat the Lord, for it is enough that thou be no mighty thunderings, voices of God, and hail, and I will let you go, and ye shall stay no longer. The fall of meteorites is accompanied by explosion-like noises, and in this case the crashes were mighty. The papyrus Ipuwer says, trees are destroyed, no fruits, no herbs are found, grain has persisted on every side that has perished, which yesterday was seen. The land is left to its weariness like the cutting of flax. In the Visuddhimagga, a Buddhist text on world cycles, we find when a world cycle is destroyed by wind, there arises in the beginning a cycle-destroying great cloud. There arises a wind to destroy the world cycle, and first it raises a fine dust, and then coarse dust, and then fine sand, and then coarse sand, and then grit stones, up to boulders as large as mighty trees on the hilltop. So Maldek came to an end with the coming of the red dust in the time of Moses and the exodus from Egypt. As time went on, the earth was engulfed in more dense matter from the fallen planet. Exodus 10:22 through 23, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. Maldek caused terrible destruction on earth, and darkness was over the entire world. Mars was also greatly damaged by this catastrophe, and that will be taken up later on. The papyrus Ipuwer speaks of a great earthquake. The towns are destroyed. Upper Egypt has become a waste. All is ruin. The residence is overturned in a minute. Exodus 12:30. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was not a house, there was not one dead. It should be stated that the word Marduk may have come from Maldek. Marduk was the chief god of the Babylonian pantheon. From his mouth issued flame. In the battle of Marduk with Tiamat, he, Marduk, created the evil wind and the tempest and the hurricane and the fourfold wind, and sevenfold wind and the whirlwind and the wind which had no equal. The description fits Maldek, who created chaos with hydrogen devices or the evil wind. Maldek therefore created the wind which had no equal. Hydrogen detonations are without equal because they will completely destroy a planet if used. I must pause here for a while in order to say that no true hydrogen bomb as such has ever been detonated on Earth. Van Tassel has shown us that space intelligences are not particularly concerned with the explosion of plutonium and U-325, the uranium mother element, because this atom is an inert element, but they are concerned with the attempt to explode an actual hydrogen bomb. If we had set off such a bomb, we would now be nothing but a bunch of floating cinders. We would be as Maldek, an asteroid belt. Space friends vowed there would never again allow a planet in the solar system to destroy itself. Therefore, no government on Earth will explode the true hydrogen. It will not be allowed. Side note, there has been an explosion of the hydrogen bomb. I'm not sure if it happened after the fact, but I think it did. And I'm assuming it wasn't the true hydrogen they're referring to. The element hydrogen is life-giving along with 5 other elements in the air we breathe, in the water we drink, and in the composition of our physical self. Explode a true H-bomb and all life on Earth will be extinguished. Van Tassel told us months and months ago that our scientists were tinkering with a formula they did not understand. The explosion of an atom of inert substance and that of a living substance are 2 different things. Hydrogen devices have utilized deuterium and tritium, not hydrogen as such. The elements exist in simplest form as atoms. And these atoms are composed of a nucleus about which electrons revolve. Elements are distinguished from each other by the number of electrons revolving about the central nucleus. Each electron carries a negative electrical charge, which is offset by a positive charge particle in the nucleus known as a proton. Elements may contain additional particles in the nucleus which carry no electrical charge and are known as neutrons. All of this basic explanation is to show why no true hydrogen bomb has been detonated. The simplest element is hydrogen, which in its most common form consists of one electron and thus one proton in each atom. Two other forms of hydrogen are known, which in addition to the one electron and one proton, also have respectively 1 and 2 neutrons in their atomic structure. These two rare forms of hydrogen are known as deuterium and tritium. Deuterium exists in the proportion of 1 atom of deuterium to every 6,400 atoms of ordinary hydrogen in nature. Tritium is an artificial radioactive element. Because their masses are so greatly different in proportion to ordinary hydrogen, the differences in properties are quite marked. Deuterium and tritium then are isotopes of hydrogen, and because of their extreme rarity, it is possible they would not have the dangerous chain reaction results that common or ordinary hydrogen would, for hydrogen of the common type is found in all living things on Earth. To create and detonate a true H-bomb would be to announce to the rest of the universe that the planet Earth had suddenly come to an end like a flame. Exploding star in the corner of the Milky Way galaxy. The history of Maldek would repeat itself. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Earth? And getting back to Marduk, we find that in his battle with Tiamat, mother of the gods, he killed her, and when he became the most powerful of all things, he set about to create order in the universe. He then split Tiamat's body in two. This sounds like Maldek battling the elements of nature and finally subduing the atomic power, mother of the god forces. Maldek became powerful because of this mastery and attempted to rule all other planets. Maldek split this hydrogen force of nature, which is Tiamat. After the exodus from Egypt, the wandering in the desert lasted for 40 years according to the Holy Bible. Then for a number of years the conquest of Palestine went on. Between the time when the Israelites left the desert and started the difficult task of the conquest and the time of the battle at Beth Horon, 12 years may easily have passed. According to rabbinical sources, the war of conquest in Palestine lasted 14 years. During the 52 years between the catastrophe of Exodus and the time of Joshua commanding the sun to stand still at the battle of Beth Horon, the earth was shrouded in dense clouds and the observation of the stars was difficult. The book of Joshua was compiled from the more ancient book of Jasher, Joshua 10:11 through 13, and it came to pass, as they fled from before Israel and were in the going down to Beth Horon, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them unto Azekah, and they died. There were more which died with hailstones than they whom the children of Israel slew with the sword. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. Therefore about 52 years passed after the Exodus before the earth encountered another swarm of meteorites from the destroyed Lucifer Maldek. At least there wasn't any major catastrophe until the time of Joshua. It should be mentioned that the book of Jasher is one of the long-lost and long-sought-for sacred books, which should have been included among the other books of the Bible, but which was not because the original manuscript could not be located. In Joshua 10:13 it says, Is not this written in the book of Jasher? And the account to be found in the book of Jasher 30:11. In reference to the 52 period, it is interesting to note that the natives of pre-Columbian Mexico expected a new catastrophe at the end of every period of 52 years. Fernando de Alva Ixtlacatl, circa 1568 to 1648, was a great early Mexican scholar. He claimed that only 52 years elapsed between two great world catastrophes, and each of these catastrophes terminated a world age. Because of the memory of the catastrophe, the people of Earth feared it would occur again. But not much happened until the 8th century before Christ, in the days of Uzziah, king of Jerusalem. At this time there occurred a devastating catastrophe called Rosh, or commotion. Rosh is translated earthquake. Amos lived at this time and predicted some sort of great cosmic upheaval before the Rosh took place. Later, Isaiah, Joel, Hosea, and Micah all declared that the earth would encounter more of the same in the future. Many generations later, it was remembered how the people fled from before the earthquake Arash in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Zechariah 14:5. Uzziah reigned from about 189 to about 740, and since a new calendar was introduced in the Middle East in the year 747 BC, the great upheaval or commotion must have taken place in the year of 747. Hebrew sources say that the prophet Isaiah began to prophesy immediately after the commotion of the days of King Uzziah. He said, Isaiah 1:7, "Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate, as overthrown by strangers." Isaiah prophesied in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Somehow, Isaiah knew that at intervals of 15 years a catastrophe occurred. The commotion of the days of Uzziah was only the beginning of sorrows and more destruction caused by Lucifer Maldek. I believe that Isaiah was visited by space intelligences who told him that catastrophe would come to Earth caused by the great fragments of Maldek. The space friends would have been able to calculate the time the destruction would return. Proof of this is found in Isaiah 6:1-3. "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings, which twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Isaiah 6:12. "Then flew one of the seraphim unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth, and said, Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and tell this people, Hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert, and be healed. Then said I, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until the cities he wasted without inhabitant, and the Lord have removed men far away. This sounds as though some people were taken by spacecraft to a safer place. In reflecting on the terror that Lucifer Maldek had caused for many centuries since the Exodus, Isaiah was inspired to write, How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of morning? Then the prophet asks how Lucifer was cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations. Therefore, Lucifer's destruction, along with the earth receiving a pounding over many years by meteor showers, caused the nations to be weakened. Many people will ask, we have meteor showers now, why don't we have great catastrophes like they had in the time of Moses, Joshua, or Isaiah? It is true that we do have meteor showers in this day and age, but they are nothing compared to what the Lucifer Maldek showers were, for these showers were much more dense. Somehow Isaiah knew that the planet Lucifer had tried to become the ruling world of the universe, for he says, For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Lucifer intended to rule all the worlds, or stars. Then Isaiah says, Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. In Hebrew and Greek, the literal meaning of hell is the unseen state, and the meaning of Hades is the unseen world. Therefore, Isaiah meant that Lucifer was brought down to the unseen state. After the destruction, it was an unseen world. Isaiah said, They that see shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee. Did he mean that observation would be difficult? The largest of the asteroids is Ceres, and it is only 480 miles in diameter. Ceres, along with the brightest of asteroids, is said to be sometimes visible to the naked eye. When nearest to our Earth and under exceptionally favorable conditions, but the rest are naturally telescopic, as their size is too small in relation to their distance. Is this what Isaiah meant when he said, They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee. The prophet said that those who looked on Lucifer later would say, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of the prisoners, or did not let his prisoners loose homewards? In calling Lucifer a man, it would seem that the prophet was referring to an actual person, perhaps the king of Babylon. But this is not the case. In Hebrew, there are 4 words that can mean man. One of these words means a man, human being, another means a man, a mortal, and another means a male. But the word man used in Isaiah 14:6 means a husband or individual. Therefore, Isaiah is saying, is this the individual that made the earth to tremble? Or is he saying, is this the husband that made the earth to tremble? In either case, does it not imply that Lucifer was an actual man? Lucifer could represent a husband very well because the planet Maldek had a moon. This moon was known as Lilith. A moon is often feminine, and the moon deity is usually a goddess. The Greek goddess Selene, Artemis, and Hecate were all identified with the moon. According to Muslim tradition, Lilith cohabited with the devil from Lucifer and was even his wife. In our contacts with space intelligences in northern Arizona, the planet Lucifer was always referred to as Maldek, or Maldek with a C, and its moon was called Malona. Father Lorber also mentions Malona in his work. He is discussed in this book under the Great Influx in the section called God Provided, Man Divided. Isaiah says that Lucifer shook kingdoms, made the world a wilderness, and destroyed her cities. This is certainly true, as we can see from the references already given. Cities and fields were pelted with meteoric fragments. The earth was shaken with earthquakes. Lucifer did not open the house of his prisoners, and he did not let his prisoners loose homewards. Those responsible for the destruction of Lucifer Maldek were prisoners of their own making. They were not allowed to leave the doomed planet and suffer the same fate as their world. They were freed when the planet was destroyed because they lost their physical equipment and were known as spirits again. Isaiah says, "But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch." All other worlds go through space in majesty, but Lucifer didn't even have a final resting place. The blasted fragments of a once beautiful and proud planet were left to float endlessly in space, that others might know what Lucifer had done. It would be a warning to all others that this should not be. It is interesting to note here that in May 1854, Leverrier read a paper before the French Academy upon the asteroids, their eccentric orbits and irregularities. He said that the hypothesis stated by Dr. Olbers that the asteroids were derived from the wreck of a larger planet that had exploded is incompatible with the real truth, inasmuch as the forces necessary to launch the fragments of a given body in such different routes would be of such improbable intensity as to render it mathematically absurd. Leverrier didn't know what a hydrogen detonation could do. The prophet then tells us, "Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land and slain thy people." Lucifer was not to end its days as other worlds which had completed their usefulness. Because of the evil of this planet, its land and people were destroyed in a horrible holocaust. The seed of evil doers shall never be renowned. Because of Lucifer's self-destruction, his children or people would not rise nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. The spirits from Lucifer were not reincarnated on earth to the extent they would hold dominion over it in the cities. "For I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant, and son and nephew, saith the Lord." Swedenborg, in his Science of Correspondences, tells us that Babel or Babylon represents those whose externals appear holy, while their internals are profane. In the prophets of the Old Testament, Babylon means the profanation of good, and Chaldea means the profanation of truth. According to Swedenborg, Lucifer signifies self-love, the profanity of holy things. Lucifer means the same as Babel. It is from the self-love of Lucifer that we get the modern phrase, "proud as Lucifer." This again applies to the reincarnational cycle of Luciferians. They were to be completely cut off from the profanation of good. Never again would such a destruction take place in our solar system. They would not be allowed to encourage the internal profanity of those on earth. In Isaiah 14:29, we read, "Rejoice not thou, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent." This could be translated, "Rejoice not all who conceive false principles, because the vortex of Jupiter, who struck you with force, is broken. For out of the center of the coiled spiral vortex shall come forth a venomous serpent that will corrupt and tread, and the fruit of this will be a fiery flying serpent." A cockatrice was a fabulous serpent with deadly glance, reputed to be hatched by a serpent from a cock's egg, and commonly represented with the head, legs, and wings of a cock and the body and tail of a serpent. The sword cockatrices came from the word cockatrice, corrupt, and calcare, to tread. When cockatrice is used in the Bible, it means an unidentified venomous serpent. Swedenborg tells us that Palestina, or Philisthea, means those who conceive false principles and reason thence concerning spiritual things, which overflow man. All those who conceive falsely are told not to rejoice just because Lucifer was destroyed by having its vortex shattered, because out of the center root of the coiled spiral vortex serpent would come an unidentified destructive object that would corrupt and tread the land, and the result or product or fruit of this would be a fiery flying object. Here we see that the people are warned that the catastrophe is not over yet, because a large meteoric fragment will head for the earth, and it will divide into smaller fragments like a fiery flying serpent, and when it strikes the earth, it will corrupt and tread the land. One object, perhaps larger than the rest, is mentioned specifically. The great meteor crater near Canyon Diablo in Arizona, about 6 miles south of the Sunshine Station of Santa Fe Railroad, was evidently caused by one of the fiery serpents. These meteors were thus described by the ancients because, as they headed for Earth, they did indeed look like flaming dragons or snakes. It is important to note in this connection that a morning star of the Toltecs, Quetzalcoatl, is represented as a great dragon or serpent, Cothwadi in Nahuatli's serpent, and the name means a feathered serpent. The morning star of the Chicamec Indian tribe in Mexico is called Serpent Cloud. The ancestors of the present-day Navajo Indians are said to have seen one of their gods come down from the sky in a cloud of fire and bury himself in the ground at the spot where the great meteor crater exists in Arizona. A cedar tree on the rim of the crater grew to be over 700 years old. Some scientists think the meteor that caused this tremendous crater may have been a small comet, and what better description would fit a comet than a feathered serpent? Of course, meteor crater was not formed by a true comet, but the meteor itself was of such tremendous size it would seem more like a comet than a meteor, which we associate with little shooting stars. The meteorite weighs somewhere between 1 million and 10 million tons. It threw out between 300 and 400 million tons of rock when it hit the Earth. The crater is about 4,100 feet wide and 570 feet deep and about 3 miles around. The outside rim is over 100 feet high. The time when it fell is unknown. Scientists say probably more than 1,000 years ago and maybe as much as 50,000 years ago. However, the fall of this gigantic meteorite is found in the legends of the Navajo Indians, and this tribe hasn't been in the southwestern area very long. They came from Canada hundreds, not thousands of years ago. Therefore, it is believed that this great meteor was part of the fiery flying serpent that headed for Earth in the time of Isaiah the prophet. Isaiah 24:17 through 19. Fear and the pit and the snare are upon thee, O inhabitant of the earth, for the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth do shake. The earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. When did the catastrophe come? Isaiah 14:28. In the year that King Ahaz died was this burden. Ahaz was the son of Jotham, king of Judah, and father of Hezekiah. Ahaz succeeded his father as 11th king of Judah and reigned 16 years, 740 to 724 BC. Therefore, the catastrophe came on the day on which King Ahaz was buried sometime in 724 BC. Isaiah 24:1. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turned it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. Isaiah continued his ministry until about 690 BC. His name means helper, and he did everything he could to help and warn the people of the impending catastrophe. After the death of King Ahaz, Hezekiah was king of Judah, and during his 14th year another catastrophe was expected. Isaiah 28:2. Behold, the Lord hath a mighty and strong one, which as a tempest of hail and a destroying storm, as a flood of mighty waters overflowing, shall cast down to the earth with the hand. A mighty and strong heavenly body was to be cast down to earth. Isaiah 29:5 and 6. Moreover, the multitude of thy strangers shall be like small dust, and the multitude of the terrible ones shall be as chaff that passeth away. Yes, it shall be at an instant suddenly thou shalt be visited of the Lord of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and great noise, the storm and tempest, and the flame of devouring fire. Isaiah 28:21. For the Lord shall be wroth as in the valley of Gibeon, that he may do his work, his strange work, and bring to pass his act, his strange act. This refers to the strange act in the valley of Gibeon, when Joshua witnessed a meteor shower and commanded the sun to stand still. Isaiah knew of this happening and says the new catastrophe will be similar to it. The prophet referred to his readers the book of the Lord, Isaiah 34:16. Seek ye out the book of the Lord and read, no one of these shall fail. Evidently, this book belonged to the same series as the book of Jasher, in which the records of the days of Joshua at Gibeon were preserved. Other ancient records must have been in the book of the Lord. The book of Jasher is once more available, but the other book is still lost. There were more catastrophes in the years ahead, but there is not sufficient room here to list all of them. Planets of our solar system were greatly disturbed by the destruction of Lucifer Maldek and its moon Lilith Malona. The Chinese say, in the 10th year of the Emperor Kui, the 18th monarch since Yahu, the 5 planets went out of their courses. In the night stars fell like rain. The earth shook. Mars and Earth suffered more from Lucifer than any of the other worlds. 2 moons of Mars have already been mentioned. However, other facts must be added. How could Jonathan Swift have guessed not only their number too, but their size and their short revolutions? Homer knew about the 2 steeds of Mars, and Virgil wrote about them. Asaph Hall gave the names of Phobos, or fear, and Deimos, panic, to these 2 moons. These names were suggested by Mr. Madan of Eton, England, because the ancients said Mars had 2 steeds and gave them these names. It should also be mentioned that Voltaire told of these moons in the story of Micromegas more than 100 years before their discovery. Phobos, the inner satellite, revolves at the distance of 5,800 miles from the center of Mars and 3,700 miles from the surface. It completes a sidereal revolution in only 7 hours and 39 minutes, a period less than 1/3 that of the planet's rotation. As viewed from the planet, therefore, it rises in the west and sets in the east. No other known satellite in the solar system revolves in a shorter interval than the rotation period of its primary. The distance of Deimos from the center of Mars is 14,600 miles, and its period of revolution is 30 hours and 18 minutes. It is smaller than the inner satellite, 5 miles, and only 1/3 is bright. The size of these satellites is not exactly known. Phobos is about 10 miles in diameter, and Deimos is about 5 miles in diameter. In mythology, the 2 steeds were yoked when the Greek god of war Ares prepared to descend to the earth on a punitive expedition. This sounds like the 2 artificial satellites, or steeds of Mars, were used together for launching platforms before Mars sent spaceships to the undisciplined earth in ancient times. To yoke animals means to join the heads or necks of animals for working together. In the 8th century before Christ, Mars suddenly became a great and feared god. In Babylon and other ancient centers, prayers were composed and invocations and hymns were sung. Many magical formulae were used in incarnations. These prayers, with lifted hands, were addressed to the planet Nergal. Like the Greek Ares, Nergal is called king of battle. Mars became the great sword of God because in one of its conjunctions, its atmosphere was stretched so that it appeared like a sword. The Chaldean Nergal is called sword god, and the Roman god Mars was depicted with a sword. In Babylonian inscriptions of the 7th century, Mars was called the most violent among the gods. Great good Mars became the frightful god of war. Shine of war, god Nergal, prince of battle. Thy face is glare, thy mouth is fire. Raging flame god, god Nergal. Thou art anguish and terror, great sword god, Lord who wanderest in the night. Horrible raging flame god, whose storming is a storm flood. Remember what Zoe told us. After their Luciferians' destruction, there were terrible disasters on Masar or Mars. Great volcanic eruptions took place. Many of our people perished. Mars literally then became a horrible raging flame god. Evidently, the people of Mars knew what was coming, so they constructed the 2 artificial satellites known as Phobos and Deimos. These 2 objects were well named, for they were created during a time of great fear and panic, not only on Mars but on Earth as well, and there certainly was panic as Isaiah has shown us. Although Lucifer actually came to an end in the time of the Exodus, it is believed that Mars did not receive as much of the destructive force of the blast as Earth did. This was due to its orbital position at the time. Mars took the main shock in the time of Isaiah. Nergal or Mars was the war god of the men of Cuth, whom Shalmaneser placed in the cities of Israel in place of the 10 tribes. 2 Kings 17:30, and the men of Babylon made Succoth-Benoth, and the men of Cuth made Nergal, and the men of Hamath made Ashima. The 2 moons of Mars readjusted the unstable condition caused by Lucifer Maldek and balanced the resonating electromagnetic field of the planet. Moons are balancers of planets with which they are connected. The people of Maldek, who had been tampering with the force of the terrible wind that has no equal, were warned by members of the Universal Tribunal on Saturn that their doom was certain if they carried out their plans to detonate actual hydrogen, but they would not listen. Therefore, the children of Maldek and the innocents were removed to other worlds. The black magicians and scientists of the left-hand path were left on Maldek to greet chaos of their own making. They believed that if by some chance the hydrogen would not do what was expected of it, they would have control of the greatest power in creation. They could then exalt their throne above the stars of God. They would be like the Most High, but since evil destroys evil, the proud Lucifer was brought down to hell, the unseen state. What was to come of the spirits of those who perished in the fall of this world? The allegory of the fall of man and the fire of Prometheus is another version of the myth of the rebellion of the proud Lucifer, hurled down to the bottomless pit. Orcus, in the religion of the Brahmins, Mahasura, the Hindu Lucifer, becomes envious of the Creator's resplendent light, and at the head of a legion of inferior spirit rebels against Brahma and declares war against him. Shiva, the 3rd person of the Hindu Trinity, hurls them all from the celestial abode into Handera, the region of eternal darkness. But here the fallen angels are made to repent of their evil deed. And in the Hindu doctrine, they are all afforded the opportunity to progress. Therefore, the souls of those responsible for the fate of Lucifer Maldek were sent to some far-off world or worlds in interstellar space, a region of eternal darkness. Through countless lives, they will be made aware of the eternity of their crime to their fellow man, and they will be able to progress once more up the worlds. They will eventually find the great path. All are on the road to all perfection. None are lost. Last days on Maldek must have been one of unbelievable madness and terror. The sacred white light known as the Ishtar Maxin went out in their temple of temples. The sky was dark, ominous, foreboding. Even the stars refused to shed their light. In the book of Job, we find reference to the wicked, and this may be a description of Lucifer. Job 18:4-21. He teareth himself, his soul in his anger. Shall the earth be forsaken for thee? And shall the rock be removed out of his place? Yea, nevertheless, the light of the wicked shall be put out, and the spirit of his fire shall not shine. The light shall be dark in his tabernacle, and his candle lamp shall be put out with him. The steps of his strength shall be straitened, and his own counsel shall cast him down, for he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walketh upon a snare. The jinn shall take him by the heel, and the robber shall prevail against him. The snare is laid hidden for him in the ground, and a trap for him in the way. Terrors shall make him afraid on every side, and shall drive him, scatter him to his feet. His strength shall be hunger bitten, and destruction shall be ready at his side. It shall devour the strength bars of his skin. Even the firstborn of death shall devour his strength. His confidence shall be coded out of his tabernacle, and it shall bring him to the king of terrors. It shall dwell in his tabernacle, because none of his brimstone shall be scattered upon his habitation. His root shall be dried up beneath, and above shall his branch be cut off. His remembrance shall perish from the earth, and shall have no name in the street. He shall be driven. They shall drive him from the light into darkness, and chased out of the world. He shall neither have son nor nephew among his people, nor any remaining in his dwelling. They that come after him shall be astonished at his day, as they went before, lived with him, were affrighted, laid hold on. Surely such are the dwelling of the wicked, and this is the place of him that knoweth not God. If this excerpt from the book of Job is read substituting Lucifer for wicked, a startling similarity is at once noted between the description of wicked and the last days of Lucifer. The light of the wicked, or Lucifer, shall be put out. The light shall be dark in his tabernacle. Destruction shall be ready at his side. Then it says, it shall bring him to the king of terrors. What is the king of terrors but the wind that has no equal? Hydrogen, devastation. His remembrance shall perish from the earth, and indeed it has. Knowledge of the destruction of Lucifer has been closely guarded secret of the mystery schools for centuries. They that come after him shall be astonished, dazed, or dismayed at his day, as they that lived with him laid hold on horror. Such a dwelling of Lucifer in this place of him that knoweth not God. Space intelligences say you can never use your great atomic power for peace or peaceful pursuits, because the very nature of atomic power is destruction, not construction. How can you attain peace by that which is itself essentially unpeaceful? We do not split atoms, for that destroys the flow of force through them. Instead, we use that flow of forces. Your people say that peace is for the strong, but this is not true. You will never obtain your long sought for world peace through armed might or military strength. You can't force other men to your will in order to assure peace at any cost. What kind of a peace is it that is attained by pointing a gun in another man's back? Therefore, can you make certain undeveloped souls desire peace? No, 1,000 times no. They must progress to the place where they realize that death and destruction through war is senseless. They must actually learn to want peace. Do you know that you destroy untold literal worlds when you perform your so-called atom-splitting process? All is the same in the omniverse, from microcosm to macrocosm. Why is it that man of earth has heard yet understood not? Peace is not for the strong, for it has been truly written that the meek shall inherit the earth. And you will never use atomic power for peace in your golden age now dawning. The earth is now on the same path that Lucifer Maldek took. Atomic power on the planet ended in destruction to end all destruction, but it will not happen on the earth. Our brothers in outer space will not allow the earth to end as Maldek did. There will be catastrophes, yes, but greet them with a prayer on your lips and joy in your heart, for it is a sign unto you that your deliverance is nigh. Maldek was the silver-tongued, or simply the tongue, before the planet was eliminated from the family of the solar system. There were altogether 13 planets. Perhaps in the end of Maldek we have the origin of the unlucky number 13. Since there are 2 planets between Mercury and the Sun and one yet beyond Pluto, Maldek was in the 7th orbit. This is a very significant fact, not only because of the symbolic meaning of the numeral 7, but because of the fact that the tongue is situated in the middle or center of the head and face. Since Maldek was number 7 among the planets, it was situated in the center of the solar family, with 6 other worlds on each side. There has been great meaning attached to the numbers 7, 12, and 13 for generations. Christ had 12 apostles, and eventually there were 13. St. Matthias or St. Paul can be the 13th. One of the 13, Judas, destroyed himself. Originally, there were 13 planets with the sun, Christ, and one, Lucifer, Maldek, destroyed itself. St. Matthias shouldn't be considered the 13th because he took Judas' place in the original 12. St. Paul is therefore really the 13th through his astounding conversion. Jeremiah 9:3, and they bend their tongues like their bow for lies, but they are not valiant for the truth upon the earth, for they proceed from evil to evil, and they know not me, saith the Lord. Lucifer Maldek may be gone forever, but tongues like bows still bend for lies. The spirit of Lucifer lives on. They profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate. Titus 1:16. From all space we cry for thee, Maldek, Maldek, thy fate is sealed. In eternity thou art lost to us forever. Ishtal Maxine, Arama, Maru, Maldek, Maldek, Maldek Ishtai. It is finished, O Father of us all. In 1900, a book was published that demands serious attention. It is called From India to the Planet Mars, a study of a case of somnambulism by Fleurny, professor of psychology at the University of Geneva. Many remarks on the Martian language are to be found, and there is plate showing the Martian alphabet. The Martian characters are similar to those of the Solex Mall. Previously, the theory was held that Lucifer collided with another celestial body, or that Lucifer was in reality 2 separate planets, and these collided. However, new discoveries show that Lucifer and its single satellite Lilith were destroyed by a thermal catastrophe. And what would hydrogen destruction be but thermal? Much research needs to be done along these lines also, but the following is quoted from the astronomical validation of the correlation between electromagnetism and gravitation, a progress report of the Educational Research Laboratories, Valley of Pines in Montague, Michigan. It is generally considered that since there is no accepted reason to believe otherwise, all the asteroids came from a single parent body that was less than the Earth in mass and size. From this view, the problem of origin becomes a problem of the means of disruption. The several possible modes of disruption resolve themselves into 2 main types. The one of a catastrophic nature, which might have produced jagged fragments and splinters of irregular shape, such as it is presumed some of the asteroids possess. The second, of a thermal, radioactive, or stellar nature, which might have produced molten or gaseous fragments that would eventually solidify into nearly spherical shapes. The density of the asteroids is not known, but the EMG formula indicate that it ranges from 2.5 to 3.5. They could be mountainous rocks, but they are the jagged fragments of a cold collision, or the cooled, originally molten and now nearly spherical fragments of a thermal catastrophe. The implications of the EMG formula favor from the latter assumption by suggesting a satisfactory solution to the problem of the variable asteroids. The problem of the asteroids is nothing new. It all started when Dr. Olbers suggested that the 4 planetoids known in his time had been formed by the explosion of a single planet. Soon, scientists began to disagree with this conclusion. The main reason why may have been that this hypothesis brought on the inevitable counter-question of what had caused the original planet to explode. And that question would have been very hard to answer. H.J. Jeffries and Professor K. Hiramaya agree with the explosion theory. Today, more than 1,000 planetoids are known compared to Olbers 4. And scientists say the estimated total mass of Lucifer is anything but impressive. They say if they gathered all the fragments together, they would make a planet far smaller than our moon. Dr. H.H. Nininger has shown by his research on the Great Meteor Crater near Winslow, Arizona, that much of the original meteor that hit that area was vaporized and turned into fine cosmic dust on impact. This is what happened to Lucifer also. Therefore, not even half of Maldek can be accounted for by asteroid observation. Much will be learned in the new age about this. Through the solar tongue, the tracks in the desert, and through Maldek, the tongue itself, we have glimpsed other worlds. And I really just loved the detail that Williamson brought to this chapter. There's a lot of amazing biblical references and channelings and quotations, historical references, even references to ancient Indians and from a variety of different cultures on the planet. If you don't believe it, you have to agree that this writing is incredibly compelling and well written. And it really does provide that alternative scenario for this solar system, that there may have been this planet that destroyed itself. We get that from the Law of One. And Law of One is saying this happened much longer ago, meaning 600,000 years ago. But it makes sense when Williams has said it was actually very recent. Or we could have been facing the results of that particular planet, and it could have ended up coming to our planet and it taking that much time for the asteroids to hit. So there's also the possibility that Maldek was destroyed and we saw the after effects of it much later on, which is still possible because he's documenting when the asteroids hit the Earth. So it's still possible to fit that within this Law of One timeline if you remember that. There's certainly a lot of other details I find interesting. We do get the implication from Williamson that the souls were not saved, but we get from the Law of One that they were untangled and put through a very detailed karmic process where they learned in second density through third density some of the lessons that they had gone through. And that may be you. You may have been one of those souls that went through this process. Maybe you were one of the souls that was tangled in a knot of fear in the middle of space around the asteroid, right? That's an amazing thing that a bunch of people on Earth were locked in a soulless void, not even aware of their own consciousness, in what they called a knot of fear, which we got from Ra at the beginning. So it's very much like that punishment that is being talked about. So many of us may have been through hell, and our existence on Earth is after overcoming so much, and we're on Earth and we were a part of Maldek. And let's pray for all the souls on Maldek that had nothing to do with it, because we have the same thing happening on our planet. So many of us are innocent to what's really going on to the world, that there are elites and different powers at work and different technologies, and we don't have any control over that. So it's an amazing idea that the entire planet is locked into this, and everyone. So he indicates in the Williamson work they were allowed to escape, and they weren't really talking about that in the Law of One. Some of them were allowed to escape, but they did ask, and so there's a slight contradiction with that. But when I was reading this, I was having visions of what actually happened. And in the Law of One material, Mars is said to have destroyed itself. It's implied in the Williamson material that Mars was destroyed by the destruction of Maldek, but could have been a little bit of both. And the movement of people from Mars to Earth is maybe what's being talked about in Exodus when they're crossing the vast sea, which is space. Space is referred to as sea in the Bible. So when they're crossing the Red Sea, the red planet, they may have been crossing to the Earth, and that's what Yahweh was helping with, because Yahweh was the being that untangled that knot, and maybe at that particular time was trying to do his best to make sure that Earth didn't destroy itself as well. It's a complicated thing because according to the law of one, and also implied here, there is a council on Saturn that rules the solar system and doesn't really like to get involved too much. And in this particular case, they even warned the planet. They said, you're going to destroy everything, and they still did it. If they have that kind of power from 8th density, they should have stopped them. I think they realized the error of their ways, and that Earth, if it's destroyed twice, would be a huge thing in the galaxy, in the history of different solar systems, even though it's vast and there's quadrillion different solar systems, right? This in particular, with the mix of things that have happened, the story of it, this epic story of all the souls that are on Earth, you get this idea that maybe this time Saturn needs to intervene and do the right thing, because they've sort of tried to lay off and say service to self or service to others. Either way, we have to stay out of it, and that people go through their own process, but they could at least protect our own free will and protect the people of Earth so that we're aware that these things are happening, that we have a greater awareness. If we can evolve to a point we're aware of the worst parts of us in the world, and we can correct that together as a group mind, not as a sleeping mass of consciousness, but an actively conscious and aware social memory complex. Very fascinating, very wonderful to read this. I really enjoyed it, and I'd love to get your impressions of Williamson's take on Maldek, and who knows if it's true, but it's really exciting to think about the implications and possibilities of what this means. In any case, you can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.